Decent?
Me? Sure, I'm decent.
Rita Hayworth was once the woman the world could not look away from. Her face lit up every movie poster. Her dancing lifted the spirit of an entire generation, and her presence on screen felt almost unreal. She became known as the love goddess, an image so powerful that people believed she had everything. But behind that glow was a woman fighting battles that most never imagined. She carried a loneliness she rarely spoke of, a complicated childhood that left marks she tried her whole life to cover, and a future filled with heartbreak that slowly dimmed the light she worked so hard to keep alive. Her rise to fame looked effortless to those watching from the outside, but each step forward was built on sacrifices, forced reinventions, and a longing for acceptance that never quite settled. She was admired, photographed, adored, and desired, yet very rarely understood. The world saw glamour while she lived with a past she could not escape and a future that felt heavier with each passing year. When audiences watched her on screen, they felt
I did do my Gala, yes, that's right. But tonight at this festival,
drawn to her confidence, her sensuality, her graceful movements. But that confidence often collapsed the moment the cameras stopped rolling. She had learned early in life that she had to play roles, not only in film, but in reality. Reinventing herself became a kind of survival. The name she was born with disappeared. Her natural identity was reshaped. Even her appearance was changed to fit the Hollywood mold. With every transformation, another part of Margarita Cancino slipped away. Her story is remembered today with admiration, but when we look closely, it becomes clear that it was also a story of unspoken pain. She gave her audience joy while struggling quietly with fears of abandonment, the wounds of an unstable childhood, and the emotional toll of relationships that left her feeling unseen. She became a symbol of beauty, yet deep inside, she longed for something simpler, something real. As we go back into her life, we discover a journey far more fragile and moving than the glamorous photographs suggest. Rita Hayworth's life is not just the story of a Hollywood star. It is the story of a woman who fought for love, identity, and peace, even when the world only wanted her image. Her tragedy was not sudden. It unfolded slowly, and by the end of her life, the woman once adored by millions was living a reality that broke the hearts of all who learned the truth. Origins and family roots. Rita Hayworth's story begins long before Hollywood ever knew her name. She was born Margarita Carmen Cancino in 1918, the daughter of two performers who lived their lives on stages rather than in homes. Her father, Eduardo Cancino, came from a long line of Spanish dancers whose traditions were passed down through generations. Her mother, Volga Hayworth, was an American dancer with Irish and English roots, raised on a belief in discipline, beauty, and endurance. Together, they lived in a world where the spotlight mattered more than stability, where applause replaced affection, and where dreams meant everything, even when the reality behind them was fragile. Her parents loved the stage fiercely, but that same passion became a kind of pressure that shaped Margarita's earliest years. While other children played outside or made friends at school, she spent her days practicing steps, repeating routines, and learning to smile even when she felt tired or overwhelmed. The rhythm of her family was built around performance, not childhood. When her father struggled professionally, his frustration often spilled into their home. His ambition for her became a weight she was too young to carry, yet she had no choice but to lift it. The Cancino family moved often, drifting between opportunities, searching for a place where their acts would be appreciated. Each move meant starting over. Each new stage demanded a new version of themselves. Margarita learned early that survival depended on pleasing others. That lesson would follow her throughout her life, shaping how she loved, how she worked, and how she saw herself. Her mother tried to give her softness where her father gave her strictness. Volga understood the unpredictability of show business and feared that her daughter was losing the chance to grow freely. But she also knew the reality. The family needed money, and Margarita was talented enough to help. So the little girl with gentle eyes became a performer before she truly understood what that meant. Her roots were mixed, restless, and complicated. They held pride and passion, but also strain and sacrifice. When Margarita later became Rita Hayworth, many people believed she had stepped into a magical life, far from the world she came from. But under the glamour remained the story of a young girl shaped by her parents' dreams and demands, a girl who learned too early how small she needed to make herself to fit into other people's expectations. Rita's origins were not defined by comfort or stability. They were built on survival, performance, and a longing for love that was rarely given freely. And those roots would echo loudly through every stage of her life, even when she became one of the most desired women in the world.
Childhood struggles and early influences. Rita Hayworth's childhood was shaped less by innocence and more by obligation. She was barely out of early childhood when her father made a decision that would change the course of her life. He began grooming her to become his dance partner, a role that demanded discipline far beyond her years. While other children discovered the world through play, Rita discovered it through pressure, long rehearsals, and the quiet fear of disappointing the man who held so much power over her. Her father's ambitions for her were intense, and his expectations were unyielding. He believed that she could continue the family legacy, that her talent could lift them out of financial struggle. But behind closed doors, his demanding presence often overshadowed her sense of safety. He pushed her to perform, to perfect each movement, to hold her body with absolute control. The dance studio became her school, her home, and at times, her prison. As she danced beside him, she learned how to hide exhaustion behind a soft smile, a skill she would later use in Hollywood more often than anyone realized. Publicly, they appeared as a talented duo. Privately, she carried the emotional weight of a controlling father who saw her more as a partner than a daughter. She had little room for friendships, education, or the normal comforts of childhood. Her world was narrowed to one focus: make him proud, keep the family afloat, and never falter. But there were moments that shaped her in softer ways, too. Music filled their small living spaces. She admired her mother's quiet resilience, her ability to balance strength with kindness. She watched performers on film and longed for a life where she could be free enough to choose her own path. These sparks of inspiration planted seeds she would not fully understand until much later. Her early influences were a mixture of pain and possibility. Dance taught her discipline, grace, and emotion, but it also taught her to silence her own needs. Her mother taught her hope, but her father taught her fear. And the world around her taught her that performance was the only way to be valued. By the time she reached adolescence, the choices made for her had already shaped her into someone older than her age. Someone who had learned to carry herself like a star, even before she understood what a star truly was. Underneath that poise, however, was a girl who hardly knew herself, whose future was already being pulled toward a place she wasn't sure she wanted to go. Yet these early struggles created the very foundation that Hollywood would later admire. The grace, the mystery, the controlled emotion that drew millions to her films did not appear by accident. They were built in a childhood where she was taught to move beautifully, even when she was hurting inside.
First steps into her career were not taken with excitement or youthful ambition. They were taken because she had no other path. When she was still a teenager, her father decided that the two of them would travel to Mexico to perform. His career in the United States had stalled, and he believed a new audience might revive their act. For Rita, it meant leaving behind the little stability she had and stepping deeper into a world that demanded everything from her. Crowded nightclubs became her classrooms. Smoky stages became the only place where she felt seen, even if the attention was often uncomfortable and far older than she was prepared to handle. She danced because she was told to, because she had been trained to, and because it was the only life she understood. Yet in those performances, something began to change. She started to realize that she had a presence that drew people in. Even in the dim lights, her movements carried a quiet intensity that audiences felt before they understood it. But performing with her father was complicated. Their relationship was strained, and the dynamic of their act only heightened the tensions between them. He treated her success as his own, and any praise she received became a reminder that she was outgrowing the shadow he needed her to stay in. She worked tirelessly, often more than any young girl should, yet she rarely heard the reassurance she secretly longed for, that she was good enough, that she was valued, that she was more than a means to survive. In time, her talent caught the attention of producers who visited the clubs. Hollywood was always searching for new faces, and Rita had something they couldn't ignore. Her beauty was striking, but there was also a vulnerability about her, something unspoken that made people want to watch her. She didn't try to impress anyone. She simply existed on stage in a way that felt honest and real. At 17, she was offered a contract. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even fair. It required her to change her appearance, her identity, and even her name. But for Rita, it was a doorway out of a life that had been chosen for her. Hollywood wasn't a dream yet. It was an escape, a chance to breathe, a chance to build something of her own, even if she didn't know who she was outside the spotlight. Those early steps were unsteady and filled with pressure, but they set the course for everything that followed. The girl who had grown up dancing on worn floors was stepping into a world that would both elevate her and break her, one that would give her fame while taking pieces of her she would never fully reclaim. Still, she walked forward, carrying with her all the discipline and suppressed emotion that had shaped her childhood, unaware that she was about to become one of the most iconic faces of her era.
Rita Hayworth. Breakthrough moment. Rita Hayworth's breakthrough did not happen overnight. Hollywood first saw her as a girl who needed to be remade, reshaped, and molded into what studios believed an actress should look like. They changed her hairline, dyed her hair, trained her voice, and gave her a new name. It was a transformation that stripped her of much of her heritage, but for Rita, it was a chance to finally step into a life that wasn't tied to her father's control. She allowed the changes because she believed that if she worked hard enough, she could earn something she had never truly felt: freedom. Her early film roles were small, often forgettable, but her presence lingered in every frame. She had a stillness that made people curious, and a sadness that felt real even in the lightest scenes. Slowly, her face became familiar. Slowly, the industry began to notice that she wasn't like the others. There was a quiet depth to her that no amount of studio polish could erase. Her true breakthrough came with Only Angels Have Wings and later Blood and Sand. These roles allowed her to step out of the chorus and stand beside major stars. But her defining moment arrived when she walked onto the screen in Gilda. The image of her flipping her hair back, stepping into the spotlight in that black dress, became one of the most unforgettable moments in film history. Audiences didn't just see beauty, they saw intensity, longing, and a complicated woman who held both strength and fragility. For the first time, Rita was not being introduced as someone else's partner or someone's daughter. She was being introduced as a star in her own right. But what the world didn't see was the weight that came with it. They adored Gilda, but Rita struggled with the character's image overshadowing her real self. People loved the fantasy, not the woman behind it. Still, she carried the film with a grace that defined an era. Her breakthrough solidified her place in Hollywood, but it also built a cage she would spend years trying to escape. Rita had finally become famous, but fame came with its own demands, shaping her future in ways she could not yet understand. She was no longer the girl her father pushed into the spotlight, but she had stepped into a new kind of spotlight that demanded its own sacrifices.
Peak career and golden era. Rita Hayworth's peak came during a period when Hollywood crafted dreams with bright lights and carefully controlled illusions, and she became one of its most radiant creations. In the 1940s, at the height of her fame, she was everywhere. Her face graced magazine covers, theaters filled whenever her name appeared on a poster, and her performances carried a magnetism that felt almost impossible to describe. Audiences didn't just admire her. They were moved by her, drawn to her quiet intensity and the way she seemed to reveal emotions she never actually spoke aloud. Studios labeled her the Love Goddess, a title she never asked for and never felt comfortable with. Still, the public embraced her as the ultimate symbol of feminine allure. She was glamorous, graceful, and endlessly captivating. Films like CoverGirl, Gilda, and The Lady from Shanghai solidified her status not just as a beauty, but as a performer with genuine emotional depth. There was something haunting in her eyes, something vulnerable behind her smile, and it gave her roles an authenticity that set her apart. What most people didn't realize was how hard she worked to maintain that image. Hollywood demanded perfection, and Rita responded with discipline that bordered on self-sacrifice. She rehearsed tirelessly, rehearsed again, and then rehearsed until her feet throbbed or her voice strained. The camera adored her, but she never stopped feeling that she had to earn her place in front of it. She carried the insecurities of a childhood where nothing came easily, and even during her greatest successes, she often wondered if she truly deserved the applause. Her golden era also brought her into the orbit of powerful figures, including Orson Welles, whose admiration for her talent was as real as the strain their marriage would later endure. For a time, she believed she had found not just artistic partnership, but emotional refuge. Yet the pressures of fame, the demands of their careers, and the unspoken wounds each carried made stability difficult. Still, their collaborations produce some of her most daring and memorable work. Even at her peak, Rita felt a distance between who the world believed she was and who she was privately. She knew that the Love Goddess was a mask, a glossy creation that hid the quiet, gentle woman beneath. But she was also aware that the mask is what audiences needed, and she gave it to them with grace, even when it came at a personal cost. Her golden era was filled with lights, admiration, and unforgettable performances. Yet behind it all was a woman holding on to herself as tightly as she could, hoping she wouldn't be lost in the persona that had made her a legend. Personal life and hidden pain. Behind the beauty, fame, and adoration, Rita Hayworth carried emotional wounds that shaped her entire life. The public saw glamour, elegance, and confidence. Close friends saw something else entirely. A woman who had been deeply hurt long before she ever stepped in front of a camera. Much of her pain came from experiences she rarely spoke about, including trauma during her childhood that left scars she carried silently into adulthood. Relationships offered her glimpses of love, but they also became sources of heartbreak. Her marriage to Orson Welles was passionate but turbulent, filled with creative synergy but emotional distance. She longed for stability,
for a partner who would truly see her beyond the screen image. Yet she often found herself paired with men who were drawn to the myth rather than the woman. Fame magnified everything, including her loneliness. Her later marriage to Prince Ali Khan briefly gave her the fairy tale life the world believed she deserved. Their romance was intoxicating, and for a moment it seemed she had finally found a place where she could belong. But the pressures of royalty, his playboy reputation, and the media's relentless scrutiny turned their relationship into another painful chapter. She adored her daughter, Princess Yasmin, but the marriage itself could not withstand the strain. Rita often said she was tired of being treated like a commodity, a figure who existed to be admired rather than understood. She wanted simplicity. She wanted a home that felt steady, quiet, and safe. But her fame followed her everywhere, making genuine connection nearly impossible. As the years passed, she developed what those around her interpreted as moodiness or forgetfulness. But these were early signs of Alzheimer's disease, a condition almost no one understood at the time. Instead of receiving compassion or medical support, she was often misjudged, accused of drinking too much or being unreliable. The truth was far more tragic. She was slowly losing pieces of herself, and no one knew why. Her pain was not loud. It lived in the pauses between her words, in the tiredness behind her smile, in the way she sometimes seemed to disappear into herself. Yet, even in her suffering, she carried a quiet grace, as if she had spent her entire life learning how to endure what she could not change.
Turning point/decline. The turning point in Rita Hayworth's life came quietly, almost unnoticed at first. It wasn't one dramatic moment, but a slow unraveling of things she had spent years trying to hold together. As the 1950s closed and the Hollywood she once ruled began to transform, Rita found herself standing at the edge of a world that no longer moved at her rhythm. Younger stars filled the screens, new directors wanted realism instead of glamour, and studios, once desperate for her presence, now treated her like a lingering reminder of an era they were ready to leave behind. Her personal life carried its own weight. Years of emotional strain, broken marriages, and the pressure to always appear flawless had carved deep, unseen wounds. She often felt exhausted in ways she couldn't explain. Lines in scripts suddenly felt harder to remember. Steps in dances she once performed effortlessly required concentration. People closest to her mistook it for stress or sadness, never imagining something far more devastating was beginning to take root. Public judgment added to the pain. When she stumbled during interviews or seemed distant at premieres, headlines called her troubled or difficult. Studio executives whispered that she was unreliable, and directors hesitated to cast her. The world that once praised her now questioned her, unaware of the illness silently stealing pieces of her mind. As her memory faded, she withdrew more and more from the spotlight, retreating to a private life that offered little peace, but at least protected her from the cruelty of public misunderstanding. Friends tried to shield her, but by then, the decline had begun to move faster. Work became impossible, simple tasks became confusing, and the radiant woman who once enchanted millions struggled to recognize the life she had lived. The heartbreaking truth was that Rita Hayworth wasn't fading because her era had passed. She was fading because Alzheimer's disease had quietly entered her world long before anyone realized it. While audiences wondered why she had disappeared, she was fighting a battle she could not articulate and did not understand. It marked a decline unlike anything Hollywood had ever witnessed,
one defined not by scandal or failure, but by the slow, painful loss of self that no amount of fame could protect her from.
Legacy and meaning. Rita Hayworth's legacy is shaped not only by the brilliance of her films, but by the humanity that lived beneath her beauty. Long after her decline, people began to see her life with new clarity. They understood that the woman the public had labeled difficult was actually facing a disease that had no name in Hollywood's vocabulary at the time. This recognition changed the way history remembered her. Instead of a fading star, she became a symbol of resilience, vulnerability, and the unseen battles many endure. Her performances continued to captivate new generations. In her dance numbers, people still feel the spark she carried, the ease with which she moved, and the joy she poured into every gesture. In her dramatic roles, audiences recognize the emotional depth of someone who understood longing far too well. Her characters were rarely just glamorous. They were complex, uncertain, searching for connection. That honesty is what keeps her work alive. But her legacy stretches beyond film. Rita Hayworth became one of the most important faces in Alzheimer's awareness, transforming the way the world spoke about memory loss and aging. Her diagnosis brought global attention to a disease that had been dismissed or misunderstood for decades. Her family's advocacy helped open doors for research, support groups, and public discussion. In this way, her struggle became a source of change, giving purpose to pain she never had the chance to name. People also remember the woman behind the icon. They remember her kindness on set, her determination to continue working through heartbreak, her desire for a quiet life despite being one of the most desired women in the world. They remember her as someone who carried both triumph and tragedy with dignity. Today, Rita Hayworth's name represents more than a chapter in Hollywood history. It represents the beauty of perseverance, the cost of fame, and the fragile courage of a woman who gave everything she had to the world, even as pieces of her slipped away. Her legacy lives not only in her films, but in every conversation that brings understanding to those facing the same silent battle she once unknowingly fought.
Closing reflection. Looking back at Rita Hayworth's life, it becomes clear that her story was never just the tale of a glamorous Hollywood star. It was the journey of a woman who spent her entire life trying to reconcile who she truly was with the image the world demanded she become. When audiences remember her beauty, they often forget the weight she carried behind it. When they recall her dances, they forget the discipline and sacrifices that shaped every graceful movement. And when they think of her stardom, they rarely imagine the quiet loneliness that followed her home after the lights went out. Rita's life reminds us how deeply misunderstood public figures can be. People saw her face on a poster and believed they knew her. They saw strength where she carried vulnerability, confidence where she felt uncertainty, and glamour at moments when she longed to be ordinary. The tragedy of her later years was not just in her illness, but in how long she endured it without support or understanding. She retreated from the world at a time when she needed compassion the most. Yet her story does not end in sadness alone. There is something profoundly inspiring about the way she lived, even in struggle. She continued to work, to love, to raise her children, and to push forward despite the pressures that would have broken many others. She refused to let the world define her entirely. And even when she could no longer control her public image, she held on to small moments of dignity. Her courage did not come from perfection, but from the way she kept moving through pain that remained invisible to almost everyone around her. In the years after her passing, the world slowly relearned who Rita Hayworth was. Not just an icon, not just the love goddess of the 1940s, but a woman who carried a legacy of artistry and a legacy of awareness.
Her life helped open conversations about Alzheimer's that continue to grow today, offering families comfort, education, and the reassurance that they are not alone in their grief or confusion. Her struggle became a catalyst for change, something she never intended, but something that honors her far more deeply than fame ever could. As we reflect on her story, we are left with a sense of quiet respect. Rita Hayworth reminds us that behind every dazzling image is a human being with hopes, fears, and scars that the world may never see. She teaches us that beauty cannot protect a person from heartbreak, and success cannot shield them from suffering. Most of all, she teaches us that a life does not fade when memory fades. It lives on in the people who continue to find meaning in the truth she left behind. Her final gift to the world was not a performance, but an understanding that compassion matters, that vulnerability deserves gentleness, and that no life, no matter how misunderstood, should be remembered only for its brightest moments. Her story, in all its brilliance and sorrow, remains a reminder of our shared humanity.